Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the TMG Expert Series Podcast. I'm Matt McKelvey of the McKelvey Group. Today we have Marty McGann of Premier Consulting LLC on the show to talk to us about maximizing accounting software with integrated tools. Let me do a brief introduction of Marty. Marty is a former CFO and controller for growing government contractors, and he has vast experience in government contract accounting. In 2009, Marty started his own business, PCI, in an effort to provide best-in-class implementation, training, and accounting support for small to mid-sized government contractors. So good morning, Marty. Do you want to add anything else about your background or bio?
Morning, Matt. No, that was actually really good. So yeah, like you had mentioned, we've been doing this for quite a while, and I think we've come up with a recipe that's really successful for small businesses to kind of position themselves with the right infrastructure for growth.
Now, I like that. Now, I have a series of questions we're going to talk about and ask and go through in a minute, but one thing you just said that really intrigues me is your idea of small contractors, because I do believe that a lot of small business and a lot of small government contractors don't realize that integration is possible, even if they're not a large integrator or a large government contractor. So do you focus on small businesses, or are small businesses just a large part of your portfolio?
So small businesses, right, is like a funny term because, if you talk to somebody, with 10 employees, they say they're a small business. You talk to somebody with 110 employees and they also say they're a small business. And the reality of government contracting, is that when you have, whether you have 10 people or 110 people, a vast majority of those are government, site employees or direct billable employees. So, your operations, right, your kind of back office operations usually, tend to stay pretty small until you're really, really large. So, we primarily, using like employee headcount as a guide, we try to stay, we try to focus in that, 500 employee and under space. That's where a vast majority of our customers reside. We do have some that go above there, but that's, that a lot of those folks still kind of consider themselves small in nature, right? Or their operations are still designed around their small business model.
That makes perfect sense, Marty. I mean, in our world too, we see the same thing. Obviously you have the NAICS code definition of small business, which can be different based upon the primary NAICS code that a contractor works under. But I actually think the same thing. And what's also interesting is you look at headcount, it's also the number of contracts or the diversity of contracts, other things that can drive what makes someone feel like they're small or large. But that's really interesting. So thanks for a little bit of background. I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would say is just the one that's kind of a little bit different, right? Are those VARs, right? The resellers, because they can be, 20 employees and have revenue, a huge revenue number because they're passing all the material through. So those always get, they get kind of grouped in there, but their numbers always seem to be a little skewed from what the standard services businesses are.
And that makes sense. That does make sense. So very good. So great. Well, thanks. I guess let's start out with the first question, which is now actually our second question. Tell us about you and PCI and your experience in the government contracting accounting space. And you can frame it around the implementation of accounting systems and integrations if you like.
Sure. Yeah. So, like you mentioned, I was a controller for a company, and when I had gotten there, I was the 70th employee in the door, and we didn't really have any systems or any structures. The company had grown. They just had a 20-person contract and a 20-person contract before that. So they went kind of from 10 or 15 people to 100 relatively quickly, and there was no accounting system. There's really no policies or processes or really anything in place at the start. And so, I had spent, most of the time I was there, kind of inventing things, right? And inventing them without, I didn't have a government contracting background. I didn't have a DCAA background. So, I took a lot of shots in the arm and shots in the chest over the course of time, learning that process. And we did everything from implementing an ERP system to rolling out a corporate credit card program to building out a travel and reimbursement process, and streamlining in HR and procurement and all the things that kind of come as you grow, subcontractors. So once I went through that, and I saw, what it kind of took to do that, I realized that no one should have to go through that by themselves ever again. And so that's how kind of the business came about. And and our goal was to really take the technology that's available today and make as much of that growth process, include an automation step or an integration step to eliminate the need for, more resources and more processes and policies and paper passing, because the customers that we have are very interested in keeping that wrap rate as low as possible, right? And I'm sure you guys, see the same thing.
You absolutely do. And I actually really liked your background, because it's the same thing with me. When I started my company, it was all about, hey, can I help people avoid the same traps and mistakes that I had to fight my way through? Because a lot of it is not necessarily complicated from a perspective of concept. It's just going to be intimidating from a potential perspective, right? Of, hey, I can just add some more work this, or we can work more hours to get something done, rather than, can we invest in a little bit of a system, not always integration, but just using systems to actually reduce that and to be able to scale. And ultimately, that's what it's all about, right? You talk about companies growing quickly from small to mid-sized to large, because they can. The government contract space is one of the only places in the world where you can double the size of your company in a day, with one contract coming in the door, or even more than double it. And so the only way to really get there, in my opinion, and to scale, is to have systems in place, and not always just software systems. As you mentioned, policies, procedures, approaches, those types of things, they all do matter. When did you start seeing a shift in customers requesting integrations with their software? Or have you seen it? Was there a point in time where you started seeing that shift?
Yeah, a couple things happened, right? I mean, pre-COVID, we had, I think maybe in 2019, we had a customer ask about connecting their payroll provider and their Deltek system, right? So, hey, we want to connect ADP to Deltek, and we want to move our employee data back and forth. And my immediate response was, it sounds great, let's do it. So we walked down that road, and we had some people assigned to that project, and by the time the project was over, another person kind of came forward and said, hey, we're interested in the same thing. And we hadn't really marketed the solution. It just kind of happened organically. And then it was a very steep curve. So, I went from having that conversation, once every 3 months to once every month to once every week to 3 or 4 times a week. And now, it's part of every day. There's almost a meeting every day with a customer that wants to connect something. I think the expectation in the industry has changed from, wow, it would be really cool if these two things were connected, to, we expect them to be connected. And that's where the shift, and that shift kind of happened all through the pandemic. And obviously we saw a huge uptick in people, interested in online payment, right? Using ACH or EFT to pay bills instead of printing checks, because they couldn't get, the check printer isn't typically the person signing the checks. So, they couldn't get to each other, right? Either geographically or, because of something related to the pandemic. So, so that became an immediate interest, and then that just kind of exploded the interest in connectivity between products.
That makes perfect sense, and it's actually something we've seen as well. So I'm glad to hear that they're coming forward, because I also think it wasn't, to me, there's the benefits beyond just the fact that folks can't be in the same location. It's the reduction of potential for errors and human errors and issues. And also, I find that when you do integrations, you actually learn more about the process itself, because it's not just always very simple to replace what a human's done if it's not a consistent, repeatable process. So that leads to my next question, basically, what are the benefits of integrating software?
Right.
And what do they remove?
It is, I mean, the first thing is what you said. It is an eye-opening experience to tell someone to sit down and kind of write down what they do, right? And they have those games that they have the kids do in school about, write down how you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then the teacher follows instructions, and everyone gets a good laugh out of all the missing steps and all the assumptions. But the reality is, that's very real in the integration space, because if you have, well, we do most of them like this, and then some of them like that, and then this one thing happened this one time, and that, and if you have that, and you really don't have like kind of a written process or policy around how you handle things, it makes creating that integration a lot more fluid, right? Because we think of, from experience, we're going to think of maybe 10 things to watch out for, but in your business, you may have some unique scenarios, and we don't know about those, right? So the more documented you have your process in advance, the easier those integrations tend to be. Now, there's some things that are, that really don't matter, right? I mean, if someone's moving like employee data when someone onboards, right? It's clear that they onboard in one system and it moves to the other. But a lot of people say, well, once I've onboarded, where do I make changes to the employee? And you have to become consistent, right? You can't make some of your changes in your ERP and some of them in your payroll provider. You have to do them all in one place because the data is moving from one place to another, and something has to be coined as like the system of record, right? It creates a little bit of discipline, and that saves a lot of time down the road. Making those simple changes up front, where hey, we're only going to enter this information in this one place, saves reconciliation in the accounting side. It saves confusion. It saves questions. It saves a lot of activities and emails and meetings that people don't need to have. So we pick up time, across the organization by streamlining these types of things.
Outstanding. Are there any basic requirements needed to integrate third-party tools? When you talk to your customers about this, do you say, hey, this is what we need to do in order to integrate?
So at a technical level, we look for what's called an open API, right? So most of your providers today offer that, right? They have the ability for a software or a developer to connect to the product and either read data or write data or both. There are some systems that don't have that. So a system that doesn't have an open API more than likely has one, but they require the development to be in-house. Right? Meaning, so like and I don't want to name names in case things change over time, but but there's a payroll provider that they have an API, but only their developers can create connections to other systems. So you can't independently do it, so you're on their timetable. So it's just important to get that clarification from from any service provider, any software provider, whether it's something like Stripe for credit cards, or whether it's something, like your payroll provider or your, or your bank, or, whoever it is, just ask if they have that capability. And if they do, which most will, then it's easy to connect. You'd obviously also need to check your ERP system if they have an open API, and that is changing dynamically as well. So, you want to try and get to an open API, because then you have a little bit more control over what's going on, as opposed to like a third-party product or a middleware tool or something that they have to subscribe to. But even those things will work, to get your systems connected.
You brought up middleware, man. It's been a long time since I've seen that. It was the way it was done years ago when I first started working with companies on integration. And the challenge there was you had two different parties having to integrate with a third-party tool. It was kind of someone makes a change anywhere along the line, it's a lot to keep up. But I know they still exist, and they're there for those situations where there isn't an open API. But I completely agree. Ideally, open API is there. Then you only deal with changes that the software provider might eventually make. But then you have the ability to adjust and pivot pretty quickly then too, because they'll publish what their APIs work and how everything works. They have documentation around it that's usually pretty easy to see. So that makes sense. It does.
Yeah, they've gotten, people, because the expectation now is that you're going to need this technology. Companies have been much more upfront about changes, and they've also been very mindful of changes. Yes. So we're not seeing people making drastic changes to their data structures. We're really seeing, hey, we're adding a few fields to the end of the table, and that won't affect your design. We've seen a few with a lot of the integrations we've written. We've seen a few upgrades to both sides of the system, and we haven't had to make any changes so far. So, so it's been pretty positive.
That's definitely great. Well, let's talk about what you generally see. And I think that with the size organizations you're talking about, obviously there's a limited number within government contracting of accounting software tools that companies use. when basically a very large possibility in a world, a cornucopia of other types of software that integrate with the accounting. What do you think? What would you say are the most common integration solutions that you are brought into for companies that are doing integrations for the first time?
So yeah, I mean, I think it definitely depends on the business, right? So there's a set of integrations that come out of companies that are in the manufacturing and reselling space, and then there's a set of integrations that come out of the services space. So on the services side, the most popular ones tend to be payroll providers. And then after payroll providers, we may see like a connection between like a Concur, right, and an expense solution or Expensify, or a solution that that people are using for expense if they're not using their ERP solution. On the non-services side, I guess kind of bridging the gap between the two is Salesforce. There's obviously a million customers using Salesforce. And people like to see if they're using that for opportunity tracking. The benefit of bringing that into your ERP is then, if you're running reports on forecasts or budgets or PWin or something, right, you can include that in your existing work financial forecast. So that's not kind of middle of the road. Obviously, if you're selling something, right, as a reseller or something, using Salesforce to track customers and all that information. So all that gets pushed back and forth. Then on the manufacturing side, there's a lot of integration around like time clocks and quality assurance and sales order type, order entry or credit card payment, and those types of things. So it's a pretty wide array of things that can get integrated and that people have interest in integration, but it really is, business based, where their focus is.
Well, that makes perfect sense. And I got to tell you, Marty, I could actually talk about this subject a lot more, because I feel like there's just so much value to the integration of tools. If you have two different tools or different tools that you're using, the integration, which you've touched on throughout all the questions in the podcast today, there's just so much more here. And I think that what I'd like to say, how could someone that's listening to this podcast best reach you and find you to have that initial conversation on what might benefit for them?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to add is that, we've worked really hard over the last couple of years, because I think what people hear, it's like all the other rumors about costs out there, right? You hear about an integration, like, oh, that's going to cost a fortune, right? It's going to be super expensive. It has to be customized because we do things a little different. And that's not the case anymore. We've worked really hard to build an integration set that is very, very consistent with the size of our customers, and making sure that what we're offering them is something that they can afford. But that being said, our website is a great place to start. PremierConsultingLLC.com. I don't know if you guys have that.
We do. We'll post it
okay.
We'll post this with the podcast, just so
okay.
you know. But I just want to make sure that you can point that out. That's all.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I would say the best place to start is the website. We have some information out there about some of the connections that exist and that we've worked on. Obviously, we don't update it every day as we do something new, but there's some information out there about how we connect and how we're able to manipulate the data before it goes in to make sure what you're getting into your ERP is the best solution.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time today with us, Marty. I think this was really valuable. I hope the viewers or the listeners can get a lot out of it. And if nothing else, either confirm what they're already thinking, or maybe encourage them to look at something a little differently. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today, and wish you the best of luck in 2022.
Absolutely. You too. Thank you for your time.
Silo was good.